Good afternoon and welcome to Eurostat's webinar series. My name is Niamh Doherty and I'm an Information and Communication Officer here at Eurostat, and I'm your moderator for today's webinar. Today, with Eurostat's experts, we'll give you insights into changes in the Harmonised Index of Consumer Prices, or HICP. We'll also touch on the classification of individual consumption according to purpose, or HICP. Remember that this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to access it later on the Eurostat webpage. Now to our experts. We'll hear from Annie Todorova, head of the unit responsible for price statistics, purchasing power parities and housing statistics. Annie will introduce us to the world of HICP and the presentations to follow. The floor is yours, Annie.
Thank you, Niamh. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm very pleased, together with colleagues from my team, to present to you the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices and the changes that took place in it. Why this is important? Because we measure inflation in the European Union, in the Euro area, in the EU member states, thanks to this harmonized inflation measure. This is a Euro indicator. It informs the monetary policy. It also plays a role for the macroeconomic imbalances procedure. HICP is built on several pillars. First is the institutional, because it is produced as a result of the partnership between the national statistical institutes and Eurostat. Secondly, there is a methodological pillar, because there is a very detailed manual that gives recommendations to the countries how to compile and report this index. This is further strengthened by European legislation. There is a regulation from 2016 adopted by the European Council and the Parliament that informs about the basic requirements that apply to this index, and there are further Commission implementing regulations that contain more technical, detailed requirements. At operational level, this is also strengthened by standards and guidelines developed and applied by the European statistical system. What has changed exactly in the index? In 2018, the United Nations Statistical Commission updated the classification of individual consumption according to purpose. This is an important classification that allows us to produce the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices, but also its sub-indices. Also, the EU regulation from 2016 requires that every 10 years the index is re-referenced, and as we were applying a common base year of 2015, from this year on, we are applying the new base year, 2025. Then we developed a new methodology which allows us to include the category games of chance into the scope of the index and to be able to report on it. Also, on 1st of January 2026, the Euro area enlarged to include Bulgaria, which had an impact on the reporting of the European aggregates. And finally, a number of member states took the opportunity to introduce national improvements where they considered them necessary in order to improve the coverage and the overall quality of the index. Despite all these changes, it is important to say that the time series did not decrease. They continued to remain available since 1997, and the users are able to consult the index and to use it for their own purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Let me introduce our next speaker, Anastasios Saraidaris, who is a statistical officer at Eurostat. Anastasios will speak about classification changes in the HICP and their impact. Over to you, Anastasios.
Thank you, Niamh. Welcome, everybody. We start this presentation section with an introduction to HICP version 2. HICP version 2 is the revised version of HICP, and HICP is the European equivalent of the international HICP. ECOICO version 2 comes along with changes in the structure of classes and subclasses, aiming at strengthening the distinction between goods and services. The new classes and the subclasses have been introduced so that they reflect better the repair, maintenance, installation, and the rental part of the cost. We are going to have an overview here of the changes at division level. As we know, before we had 12 divisions. Now we have 13 divisions. The five first divisions, they are impacted. They are changes. However, these are mostly relevant to the additional detail at the subclass level and target reallocations on specific items. One can notice, however, very large impact at the case of the Division 6, which is relevant to the health services. And this happened for the needs of reclassifying the health services according to type of care, which was not the case in the past. Division 7, which is relevant to the transport, also impacted. There are also changes, and the new group for a new group for transport services for goods, it is introduced as well as several the reclassification of several items. Divisions 8 and Division 9 also they are significantly reorganized regarding the information communication related products and services. Whereas Division 10 and Division 11 they have undergone scope refinements so that the services are better distinguished from the goods part. We have also major changes in Division 12. Now it is split with the current classification in the new Division 12, which accommodates the insurance and financial services, whereas the additional 13th division accommodates the personal care and social protection services. Let us have a look now to the major composition changes, namely the reclassifications in one of the most important main special aggregates. This is the services. We identified and we single out for the sake of this presentation 8 cases of transitions. The part of repair and hire services, it is moving from the part of the good as well as the software and the other outpassing the dental services, and now joins the services special aggregate. Similar is the case with the treatment of the part of the cost that is relevant to the delivery of goods when we are talking about furniture. And we have one more case of change. However, this goes in the opposite direction. This is the move of the non-fiction ebook downloads from the services to the non-energy industrial goods. However, major composition changes we can find also in the special aggregate of food. 4 items they changed the classification and therefore they were reclassified under the special aggregate non-processed. This is the case with the frozen fish, which is currently joined in the new classification, the fresh and chilled fish, the frozen seafood and frozen vegetables. Again, they were reclassified to the non-processed foods. Mineral or spring waters, now they are abolished. The part of processing and the added ingredients, and therefore again they are reclassified to the non-processed food. Major composition changes we have also in the case of food, the seasonal food special aggregate, and these are relevant to the move of the frozen fish to the seasonal special aggregate, and the move of the snails and the frogs out of the seasonal item because of its reclassification in meat. Now, one question that many times comes as a major concern is if the already published inflation series changed in the new classification. Indeed, the scope of this exercise, of this project, was to achieve the same level of detail with the old series and to cover the same time span, namely from 96 to 2025. to have that achieved, we had to keep two major requirements. First, that the all items HICP remains the same. Second, that users will be able to reproduce the all items HICP and any other aggregate. However, if somebody asks if there are breaks in the bug series currently, yes, this is unavoidable. And this is happening because as a result of the reclassification changes and the changes in the applied methodologies. Also, there may be noticed because of the occasional use of level shift adjustments in January 2026. However, these breaks are not that often, and they are relevant to particular cases. Cases that are relevant to the data limitations and most pertinent to the years before 2015. They are relevant to rectifications of all old classification choices, and again, this is mostly relevant to the years before 2015. And also, we need to remember that there were breaks in the special aggregate series in 2017 due to the classification extension from 4 to 5 digits. Now, another question is if the HICP series for January 2026 are linked to the back series of HICP version 2 or the back series of HICP version 1. Indeed, they are chain linked to those of HICP version 2 of December 2025. And what was the methodology to have that achieved? It is the monthly and annual chain linking, as it is foreseen in the Commission implementing regulation. Discussing now about the impacts of the change classification of the HICP, we start with the reference year 2025, which is the most important period, and we can say that these are practically negligible at the level of all items HICP for Euro area and EU. The percentage impacts, though, at all items index level for a group of countries may be identified also at the second decimal for ad hoc cases of countries, or even in the first decimal for one country. Now, discussing the impacts at the level of at the European level and for the four main special aggregates. For the year 2025, these are identified at the second decimal place. For the year 2018 until 2024, the changes rates from minus 0.12 until 0.05, and the impact, the special aggregate mostly impacted is this for non-energy industrial goods. And last, we're going to see the impacts at the national level for the whole period. And for the four special aggregates, the changes are mostly in the range of minus 0.05 to 0.05, with the exception of some ad hoc country cases where the impacts are identified in the first decimal place or even higher. For other special aggregates, due to the composition changes, we may say that there are some common horizontal patterns that can be identified across all the countries as changes at the decimal or even unit level. And these are mostly relevant to the special aggregates of processed food, non-processed food, non-energy industrial goods, services related to communication, as well as to the special aggregates of seasonal food and energy and seasonal food. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you, Anastasios. Now we'll hear from our next speaker, Wanda Maria Guerreiro, who is a statistical officer at Eurostat. Wanda will discuss other methodological changes that have occurred. Over to you, Wanda.
Thank you, Nim, and good afternoon, everyone. I will give you a brief introduction to other improvements that were made in the HICP. So first, we rescaled the HICP to a new base year, 2025. And we also include games of chance in the inflation. And the member states that compile their own HICP, they always make methodology improvements, and this year more than ever. And finally, we have a new member in the euro area. So why do we even rescale the HICP? Well, it's a very easy mathematical operation, but it improves the readability because you see, in December 2025, the base, if I look at the index in base 2015, I see 129.7, which means that the inflation since 2015 was 29.7, roughly 30%. Well, that's very interesting information, but I don't really care about what happened back in the days. 2015, it was 10 years ago. I want to know the most recent inflation. So if I look at the index based in 2025, then I have 100.6, which means the inflation since last year or during last year was 0.6%. And that really is much more interesting information for me. Anyway, the inflation, like the annual rate of change, does not change according to the new base. It's always the same. It's always 2%. Now, is it mandatory? Yes, we put it in the law already in 2016. It says that every 10 years we have to rebase the index. And now we made this new regulation, like in 2025, that says that the indices should be rebased to 2025. Next novelty is the introduction of games of chance in the inflation. And games of chance is not only lotteries and scratch cards and the casinos. So you also have the betting online, very, very trendy. And that includes like everything, especially sports, very, very important. Betting on football, on horse races, everything. So we try to cover everything, although it's not easy. So they were only included in the HICP since January 2026 because it's not easy to find data and to find a methodology to cover it. Not many countries in the world have it. But we managed, we did our work, our research work, and we published these recommendations on the treatment of games of chance in December 2025. So in December 2024, then in 2025, we were getting data and getting prepared to have it since January 2026. Now, what's the impact? Well, not much. The impact in the inflation of having now the games of chance is not big. But that's what inflation is about. A weighted average of the little impacts, of the little price increases. So we cannot ignore it. Now, the importance of games of chance, of course, it varies depending on the country. And how do we measure the importance of a product? It's according to how much households spend on it. So the share of expenses made by households in games of chance, it ranged from 0.2% in some countries to 3.5% in other countries. Now, where is in the law that is mandatory? Well, actually, it's because now it's not in the list of exclusions. There is an article in the Commission Regulation 2024 that has the list of excluded products in the inflation, and games of chance used to be in this list, and now it's not. The countries, they compile their own HICPs and they make methodology improvements every year. Every year, samples are updated, the new shops are included in the samples, and new data sources that brings the most important in terms of increasing the quality of the result. So, of course, more and more we are using big data, no samples, just full data sets that are transmitted to the NSIs. to statistical offices. So, for example, scanner data from the supermarkets. When you go to buy something in the supermarket, everything is scanned, the barcodes, they have all this data they send to us, and we compile the inflation with that. Or you get all the rents data from the tax office or some register, or the electricity. Instead of having just some bills of electricity, you have all the bills of electricity every month transmitted electronically, and you can work with that. So every year, one or more countries have this kind of data sources and make this big change. This year we had, of course, again for supermarkets, new countries using supermarket scanner data and electricity, package holidays, and sometimes we also have flights and pharmaceutical products. And what happens is that when you use this kind of data, then you have to use multilateral methods. It's no longer a simple average of prices. It's not like 5 prices anymore. It's like 30,000 prices. So the methodology is completely different. And what countries made this year, since January 2026, the ones that were already using these methods, they restarted the index. What does it mean? When you compile the multilateral index, you use 25 months of data. And then the last month, you glue it, splice it in the series that is published. And throughout the years, the index loses a bit some properties and it gets a little bit biased. So we took the chance to clean it up and restart the multilateral index. Now, finally, we have a new member state using euro currency. I think everybody knows who is it. It's Bulgaria. Welcome to the euro area, Bulgaria. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanda. And now we'll hear from our final speaker, Olivier Delaunoy, who is a statistical officer at Eurostat. Olivier will discuss accessing Eurostat's data on HICP. The floor is yours, Olivier.
Thanks, Nim. Hello, everybody. My colleague presented the change in the data itself, and I will be presenting the change in the way we disseminate the data. So the first thing to know is that the data in the old classification will remain available. The last period of that dataset will still be 2025, as it will not get updated anymore, but the access to this information is still possible. On the new datasets, we also implemented some changes. We had to find new codes for the datasets because we cannot have 2 datasets with the same code. And we also had to change the item codes within the dataset because it's a new classification, so the items are different. And finally, we also merged some of the datasets into one, and I will show you that directly after in a live demo. The other change that we did in this new classification is that we were able to calculate the special aggregates in the new classification only starting in January 2017. For the older period, we just copied the special aggregates from the old classification. So I will show you now how it's presented in the web page. So if you go in the Eurostat web page and you click on the database, this is how the data will show. You have the old classification eco version 1 under one folder. This is the classification that you used to have for the last several years. And we created a new folder with the eco version 2 classification, the new classification. And if you look inside, you will see that you have less datasets. This is because, as I explained, the 4 monthly datasets from the old classification have been merged into one. And also the HICP at constant tax, we used to have 3 datasets. They also have been merged into one. The remaining datasets remain the same. So we have the annual datasets, the first published datasets, the contribution to euro area inflation, the administered prices, and then we have the country weights and the item weights. If you look inside one of the datasets, let's take this one because it's the merged one, you can see that the 4 different datasets that have been merged are present in the unit dimension. So you have the indices, we publish them in 2025 equal 100 and 2015 equal 100. We don't publish them anymore in the 2005 equal 100 and 1996 equal 100. But then you have the 3 other datasets, the monthly rate of change, the annual rate of change, and the moving 12 months average rate of change. Also, if you go inside the HICP dimension, you will see, as before, the different HICP codes. They look similar, but the definition changed. That's why we had to create a new dataset. So you can select again all the HICP and the special aggregates at the bottom of the list. The rest of the dimension, the geo dimension, which comprise the country and the European aggregate, did not change. The time is still the same time period that is available. So those are the only changes in our dissemination. And I hope this explains now very well what were the changes. I give the floor back to Nim.
Thank you, Olivier. And thank you to all of our speakers for your expert insights. Your presentations have given us plenty of information about the harmonization of the Index of Consumer Pricing, or HICP, and the classification of individual consumption according to purpose, or COICOP. As part of our question and answer session, Anastasios, Vanda, and Olivier will take the stage. Now, over to our first question. This one's for you, Vanda. Are there any differences between the United Nations COICOP, or Classification of Individual Consumption According to Purpose, and the ECOICOP, which is the European Classification of Individual Consumption According to Purpose?
That is a very interesting question. Thank you. Actually, there is absolutely no difference. It's really just the name that is different. There is a reason for it, of course, because before there was let's say, an old version of COICOP, of the United Nations COICOP, like old, like 96 or 94. And in Europe, we were not willing to wait so long for an update, so we made our own, a bit change. We changed it a bit, and we call it ECOICOP. So now in our regulation, we have it ECOICOP, and even if we now follow the updated UN COICOP, and it's exactly the same, we still need to call it ECOICOP, European COICOP. But it's the same. Now it's the same.
Lovely. Thank you, Vanda. Now, our next question is, what are the most significant conceptual and structural differences between ECOICOP and ECOICOP version 2? Tassos, this is a question for you.
Thank you, Neil. This is indeed a very interesting question. We know that the transition of the COICOP to the new classification in January 2026 is perhaps the most important structural update of HICP since its introduction. However, we acknowledge that the boundaries between goods and services in the last years have gradually become blurred, as services have gained increasing prominence in household consumption. This development reflects broader changes in economic life, including the emergence of new goods, digital services, and consumption models that combine elements of both goods and services. For this reason, ECOICOP version 2 aims at distinguishing between goods and services wherever this is possible by creating new classes and subclasses so that the services of repair, maintenance, installation, and rental of products are better reflected. Discussing about the divisions, we need to mention that at the level of subclasses, the changes were quite substantial. We have in total about 295 transitions, and only 100 of them, they are transitions one-to-one. and one-to-many, the more simple ones. Whereas 195 about cases, they refer to combinations, transitions of subclasses in ECOICOP to many other subclasses in the new classification. The most impacted divisions are those of the food, the furnishing and household equipment, health, transport, information communication, recreation, sport and culture, and of course, Division 12, which is relevant to insurance and financial services, and Division 13, relevant to personal care. Let me give a very brief example that illustrate the changes in Division 8. The purchase of a laptop, whereas before it was recorded under Division 8, now it is recorded under Division, before it was recorded under Division 9. Now it is classified in Division 8. And moreover, the internet subscription costs now, which are very relevant to the purchase of the laptop, they are classified under communication services within the division, the updated Division 8. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
That's
hope
all.
that I answered the question.
Absolutely. Thank you. So our third question is, are revisions of the inflation possible if a country identifies misclassified items while compilating the back series? Olivier, this is the question for you.
The answer is yes. Not only it is possible to correct the back series, but also it should be done. And then I was precising that it's the first time we use this new classification, and it's published only recently, so people start using it, and it's very possible that countries might find error in their classifications or even bug in their systems. And if that happens, of course, they need to correct that, and we will work with them to correct it the best way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Now, our fourth question is, when a person living in a country bets using an app of another country, for which country inflation does it count? Vanda, this is the question for you.
Oh, that's complicated. So a person is in one country, whatever country, betting on an app that is on another country. That is follows the rules of the internet purchases on services and streaming services. So it is the rule, we follow the VAT rules for that. It's where the VAT is charged, which in this case would be in the country where the person is. It's where the service is delivered or starts being delivered. Did I answer
Lovely,
the
thank
question?
you. Thank you, Vanda.
I hope that was clear.
Absolutely. So question number 5 we have here is, were delivery fees not included in the inflation before January 2026? Tassos, this question is for you.
Thank you, Neil. This is an important question. And the answer is clear. And this can be even very short. Delivery fees were in practice should have been already collected together with the prices of goods in cases such as online purchases with the previous classification. However, that was not a requirement for these fees to be reported separately from the price of the good. Therefore, beyond the methodological limitations to have that captured, no delivery fees were not reported in the previous classification. However, the new treatment allows, in principle, for an improvement in inflation measurement by separating the prices of goods from those of transport services. And we can highlight two innovations in that scope. We have the delivery fees for online purchases, which are captured under courier and parcel delivery services, and the delivery of goods that capture separately charged delivery services for goods such as furniture, supermarket shopping, local delivery of purchase items such as takeaway meals, prescription drugs, and so on. the common aspect in all these purchases is that the delivery service takes place immediately after the item is purchased or within a short time after the purchase. And something last, it is quite noticeable that currently in 2026, delivery of goods, they have a weight that it is above 1 part out of 1,000, which means that it was worth doing these changes in the new classification.
Thank you, Tassos. Now, question number 6, Vanda, I'd like to redirect it back to you. Does the rebasing of the HICP help maintain the accuracy of inflation measurement within the European Union?
Not quite. Actually, it doesn't make a big difference in terms of the inflation measurement. I mean, last year the inflation was 2%, and it still is 2% no matter the base of the year. It's just a matter of readability. It might the annual rates or the monthly rates can change a little bit due to rounding errors. The rounding changes, of course, when you make calculations with numbers, there's always a rounding that can play a role. But other than that, the rates shall remain exactly the same, and there is no really change on how the inflation was measured. It's not a methodology change. It's all remains as accurate as it always was.
Thank you, Vanda. Now, Tassos, question number 7. Is the COICOP, or classification of individual consumption according to purpose, updated regularly?
Thank you, Niv. Just let me start by saying that we have just implemented the new classification. And this is a decision for the future in coordination, of course, with the UN Statistics Division. And of course, it will depend on the needs of the economic life and the changes in the everyday consumption patterns of the households. Now, regarding the Eurozone and the EU countries' needs, Eurostat keeps collecting classification questions and requests, and in cooperation with the United Nations Statistics Division, give opinions on arbitrary classification cases. It is true that there is no a concrete schedule for the next update. However, if there are analytical and methodological requests, this may potentially trigger future classification refinements or revisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tassos. Now, question number 8. Our audience member says, I noticed that the new classification does not have the inflation of meat by type of animal. Ollie, could you please explain why this is?
Well, first, this statement is half true and half false. Indeed, in the classification with the 5 digits COICOP code, there is no disaggregation of the meat by type of animal, but it exists with the 6-digit codes, which normally we didn't use to collect data for the 6-digit code. But for the meat and for a subset of other items, we asked our country to send us the data with the 6 digits. So this is still voluntary on voluntary basis for the country, but for the meat, we have most of the country that did report the country, and they are already published. So you can find the information on our website on the inflation for meat by type of animal for some countries that did provide the data. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Now, Tassos, back to you. A question, is core inflation affected by the change in classification?
Yes, this is a very important question, and becomes more and more often a question that we receive in Eurostat. First, we need to start by saying that core inflation is a measure of inflation that excludes the most volatile components of the price index, typically energy and the food, in order to better capture the underlying or persistent trends in the prices. These components are excluded because their prices are often driven by external shocks, like weather, like geopolitics and commodity markets. HICP serves as a key macroeconomic indicator to assess underlying inflationary pressures and determine monetary policy. And for these reasons, core inflation is most relevant to be monitored. In the HICP, we have four main special aggregates: food, energy, which are relevant to the non-core inflation, and the two ones that are relevant to the core inflation is the non-energy industrial goods and services. It is important to mention that at the annual rates of change at the Eurozone and EU aggregate levels, the special aggregate of non-energy industrial goods is the one most impacted and at the most by minus 0.12 percentage points. Second comes the special aggregate of services, which again reflects part of the core inflation. And it is impacted at the most by plus 0.05 percentage points for the period 2018-2025. The reason of this impact is the separation of the part of the service from the part of the good. And we have, as we discussed in the presentation before, there are 8 very distinguishable cases of such separation. If we go to, somebody asks for further details and we want to attempt a more disaggregated level of approach, then we have to move on to the 13 special aggregates and particularly to those that are relevant to the two main, to the non-energy industrial goods and the services. And again, there we see also quite noticeable impacts which are relevant to the changes in the durability labels and also again to the shifts from the services part out of the good part. I think that I replied this question.
Indeed. Thank you, Tassos. We have another interesting question from the audience. I have an OR script that pulls the HICP data. Will it continue to work? Olivier, this question is for you.
Yes, thank you. Well, indeed, the R script will continue to work, but it will continue to pull the data from the old data set that is not updated anymore. So if you want to take the data from the new data sets, you will need to change the code of the data sets that you want to pull data from, and you will need to review also the filter that you use in that data set, mainly the COICOP filter that becomes COICOP 18 with the new items that you want to get. And you might also have to check on the unit dimension for the datasets that have been merged.
Very nice. Thank you, Olivier. And with that, we wrap up our webinar on changes in the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices, or HICP, in 2026. Thank you to our speakers, Annie, Anastasios, Vanda, and Olivier, and to you, our viewers, for joining us and sending questions. Please remember that if we didn't manage to answer all of your questions now, we'll follow up and send your answers via slido.com. And please participate in our feedback survey via Slido. There you can also find the address to contact our multilingual user support if you have any further questions. For now, from Eurostat in sunny Luxembourg, I'm Neva Doherty, wishing you a lovely afternoon.